Our speaker here, for many of you, needs no introduction. Uh, excuse me. Valerie Martin serves as the state historian and curator of the Michigan State Capitol. And this is probably about the fifth or sixth time that she has been here. And most of you, I think, have been here to see her. Um, and So I'll just turn it over to Valerie and her group.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's very nice to be back. Very nice to see many familiar faces. Thank you for signing up for yet another Capital program. I am joined today by three of my colleagues. So basically, you're looking at our collections team up here. So Brian Page is our registrar. He handles the three-dimensional artifacts as well as all of the papers in our archive. Shayla is our art registrar that takes care of our art collection, and Jacob is our photo archivist. So this is a project that we have worked on together for the last 3 years, 4 years. I don't even know how long at this point in time. And the project and the exhibit that we're going to be telling you about today are inspired by an addition to our collection that came in as a donation from the Weidman family. So the Weidmans are a German family. We'll delve more into the family tree and the who and when and where in a little bit in the presentation. But I first learned of the Weidman family a few years ago when I got a phone message. I walked in one Monday morning and had a voicemail from a very nice woman I had never met who told me that her great-grandfather had helped decorate the Capitol with the William Wright Company. And she had some things from him. Might we be interested? And I was like a kid on Christmas Day because we had always known that the William Wright Company decorated the building. And when I say decorated, if you took the tour, you know there's a lot of decoration. We have over 9 acres of hand-painted art throughout the building. And we have always known the Wright Company did the work, but there are no Wright Company records that survive. So we never knew who was working for him. And I cannot tell you how many times every single one of us has been asked on tour, who designed all of this? Who picked these colors? Who chose these designs? And we have often had to say, well, that's a good question. We're not really sure. So to make a very long story short, this donation has answered many of those questions. And we have since come to realize that really, the leader for the Wright Company on site was a man named Christian Weidman, and he was the one making some of those design decisions. Now, it's not to say he was in charge of everything. If you've ever been part of a project with government officials, you know that everybody has opinions, and no one is afraid of sharing those. But he was on site in the building on and off for almost 6 years. So he really became a part of the Capitol community in that era. And his love for the building, his affection for it was passed down through the family. So we'll be talking about multiple generations. Here you can see Christian on the left, his son Oscar, his daughter Elma, and then our original donor was Elma's daughter, Marge. And we have actually now worked with 4 different branches of the family to bring in additional pieces of what we refer to as the Christian Weidman collection. And you'll see many of those in this slideshow today. This slideshow and story is part of an exhibit that we also have on site at the Capitol that will be up through the end of November into early December. If you want to come see it, call us ahead of time, because at some point over the holidays, we're going to have to tear this down and put up the next one, frankly. This exhibit is called Art Adorns the Paths of Life, which actually comes from the collection. The collection includes not only a lot of Christian's drawings, but also some poetry written by his brother, Heinrich. And we actually worked with the Translation Center at Michigan State University to have Heinrich's poems translated from German into English, because none of us are fluent in German. And when we came across that line in one of his poems, we thought, that's the title, because art adorns every path that you take anywhere in the Capitol building. The building is full of art, and we have Christian to thank for that art. So I'm going to be talking today about the center portion of the exhibit, if you will. So actually decorating the Capitol and what that original project looked like. And then Jacob and Shayla and Brian will all be talking about different facets of the exhibit and also telling us about how we can learn more, because there's also a website that goes with all of this with yet more information. So our story in some ways starts in 1879 when we open the new, or the current, Michigan State Capitol. If you know your Capitol history, you know that Michigan has had 3 Capitol buildings. Our current was constructed over a 6-year period from 1872 to 1878. And just a few days after the building officially opened, a Lansing photographer came in and took a series of interior photographs, which are gold for us because they show us what the building looked like on day one. What is remarkable about these photographs is how empty they look. And this is not just because they're black and white. It is because we are looking at a building that is finished in the structural sense, but is not finished in the artistic sense. And this is something that was commented on from the dedication day forward. Many people commented on the fact that all of the walls were white. Or here, as you can see, one quote, "The large expanse of white or light-colored walls is somewhat tiresome to the eyes." Because, of course, the Victorians didn't do white. They would not have seen this space as finished. They would not have seen most modern spaces as finished because the Victorians like to decorate, and they decorated every surface they could find. The problem was decoration cost money. We had just spent almost $1.5 million constructing this building. And frankly, we didn't have any more. We were done. We had levied a special tax to pay for construction. Everyone was very pleased that it came in on budget per our plans, but we had never budgeted for the interior decoration. So we told everyone, don't worry, just give it time. That plaster needs to cure. Well, what that meant was we ended up waiting like 6 years until we started to decorate. And I have often wondered how many people came to see the brand new Capitol and left really disappointed because it wasn't really properly done. Now, doubtlessly, people working in the building speculated about how it would be decorated. And I am sure everybody had opinions. I have often wondered if some people thought it might end up looking something like the Bermuda corridors. This, of course, is part of the U.S. Capitol. And of course, Michigan is modeled in many ways on the U.S. Capitol. And Constantino Bermuda, who was an Italian artist, had been executing art with his team in the U.S. Capitol in the 1860s and 1870s. He and his team were responsible for the apotheosis of George Washington, which is the artwork that is in the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. They also did several committee rooms and corridors that today bear Bermuda's name. And of course, as we look at this image, this is a reminder that the Victorians loved color, that they loved lots of different designs. A lot of what you see here is classically inspired, in part because in America, we are still taking our cues very much from Western Europe at this time. And we like to think our government buildings are carrying forward the traditions of the ancient Greek democracy and the ancient Roman Republic. This is why when we build our capitals, they look like little Roman temples early on. We don't want them to look like a palace. We don't want them to look like Parliament. We're doing something different. And so just as we are inspired by Greek and Roman architecture, so we are inspired by the art that is being rediscovered in places like Pompeii, where there are ongoing archaeological excavations. Now, when we actually get to the point of decorating, we're now midway through the next decade. So it's 1885. Keep in mind at this time, the legislature met every 2 years. So we would elect our legislators, and yes, that's all of them, because everybody, House, Senate, Governor, everybody served a 2-year term in those days. We would elect them in even-numbered years, and then they would serve in session in odd-numbered years. And if all was good, when they went home in April or May or June, they would not come back again. unless there was some kind of problem, a forest fire, some sort of crisis the state had to deal with, then the governor could call them back into special session. So during the regular session of 1885, finally, we introduced legislation to start the decorating project. And we start it with what we think of today as kind of the rooms on the tour, if you will. So these are the big, splashy public areas, things like the House and the Senate chamber, spaces like the Supreme Court, the governor's office, the rotunda. These are the show places. And frankly, we're going to, even within this large contract, we're going to have to work in one area and the next, because we are going to be doing this decorating project with a fully occupied building. We do not move people out. That has never been our style when it comes to art or construction. We just, in some cases, literally put up scaffolding over the desks and everybody hangs on for the ride, which can get a little wild. So the first appropriation passes with very little political wrangling. And then the state puts together a committee that is going to advise. Basically, they will select an artist or team of artists, and they issue an RFP, a request for proposals. 15 different decorative firms will submit proposals, and they're going to be mostly from the Midwest, with the exception of a firm from New York. This is very much in keeping with how we built the building. People often say, oh, well, it's the Michigan capital. Certainly everything is from Michigan. No, we don't have marble in Michigan. There are plenty of things we needed to get from other states. And likewise, frankly, we were always concerned about the best deal for the dollar, more than we were concerned about the origin of our products. So we are fine with the idea that a firm from Chicago or from Cincinnati or New York or Toledo, well, Toledo could be questionable, that they would get the contract. Ultimately, the William Wright Company wins. So they win the right to this first phase of the project. So it is possible that we could have had 3 different decorative teams doing 3 different phases. That would have been a unique nightmare, I'm sure. Now, who was the William Wright Company? William Wright was by this point in time, he had been in business for over 20 years, nearing 30. He was an English-born artist, English-born and trained artist who had immigrated to Detroit as an adult and had opened his interior decoration firm in Detroit. And this firm supplied many, many different types of labor and also types of materials. So here you can actually see one of their advertisements. You can see that they would hang wallpaper. They would produce custom window shades, some of which probably had artistic scenes painted on them. They were basically interior decorators. And as part of that decoration team, they employed a number of decorative artists. And we'll talk more about what makes a decorative artist versus an artist later on in the presentation. The first place that they start to work in December of 1885 is in the governor's office. So the images that we are showing you today are all pre-images. So these are from that first series of photos that were taken in 1879. If you did not come on the Capitol tour, what was it, last summer, you'll just have to come visit us some other time to see how everything ended up when the decoration was done. And you, of course, will be part of a very long tradition of people coming to see this. Frankly, everybody was curious about the art project from the moment it began. And because Lansing has always been a very small town with limited goings on, there were updates printed in the local paper. So here we can see on December 18th, the work of frescoing the Capitol building has been commenced. The governor's room will first come under the decorator's brush. Now, they would move from the governor's office into the chambers. So a lot happens in 1886. And as part of this project, we are clearing the rooms of furniture. And importantly, we are taking out the carpets, which in the Senate leads to a bit of an issue. There's always question about who picks the colors and why. And we know that sometimes either the press got it wrong or People change their minds because there is one early article that talks about the fact that the Senate is going to be painted red and the House blue. Now, if you know the building, you know we ended up with the opposite color scheme. The House is red and the Senate is blue. Whether that had to do with a strongly opinionated Speaker of the House or Senate Majority Leader, or it was just a mistake in the press, we don't know. But we do know that when they painted the Senate chamber and went to put the first carpet back in, oh, golly gee, that carpet doesn't match the walls now. I guess we will have to buy a new carpet that matches. And guess what? The William Wright Company sells carpet. So we purchased what we would come today to think of as the chicken coop carpet. Ask a question about that later on if you're curious about the weird name. And of course, when the carpet arrived, this again was news in Lansing, and there are descriptions about how the carpeting is being like craned into the building through a window. This is going to come, of course, in large rolls. And one newspaper reporter described it as looking like a giant petition was being sent in through the window to the legislature. And here we can see actually a piece of that original carpet, which was used in the chamber for about 20 years afterwards. Also in 1886, they decorated the Supreme Court chamber, which has one of the most spectacular surviving decorative paint schemes in the building. The court was special. Everyone knew the court was special. So for example, they have highly textured plaster walls in addition to beautiful wall art and a gorgeous ceiling. In fact, it is one of the spaces that still has an original ceiling in it that has not been repainted to this very day. And apparently it was so impressive that when the Supreme Court came back in for their October term in the fall of 1886, everyone was a little distracted by the new art. It says 20 motions were submitted, none being of importance save to the parties directly interested, and the large number of leading attorneys present varied their intellectual labors with admiring glances at the rich decorations. 1886 is also when we built scaffolding and painted the rotunda. So this would have involved scaffolding from the glass floor up to what we commonly refer to as the stars, except there were no stars yet. That would have been 160 feet of scaffolding. And ultimately, this area would be absolutely transformed. At the very center, through the open oculus or the eye of the dome, we would paint a blue sky, and there would be 110 stars gilded onto that surface using both yellow and white gold. People often say, well, why 110? You know, if you ask a representative, they think that's a great number because that's the number of representatives we have today. There were not 110 representatives at the time. There were only 100. So that's a pure coincidence. And honestly, again, we don't know why they chose that number. We don't believe there is any specific constellation represented. It's possible, but nobody has talked about that in 140 years. So I doubt it. But you have to remember, many of the men who are working on this building and many of the men who are working in this building are European born. They are very much tied still to the traditions of the old world. And if you have traveled in the old world, you know that often domes have some depiction of the sky in them. In the national capital, you have the apotheosis of George Washington. So you have George Washington being raised up into the heavens and crowned. He is sitting on clouds. So sometimes those scenes are daytime, sometimes they are nighttime. And it's a reminder that if you go way back to those Greek and Roman temples, which often had domes on them, those domes were open. They had an open oculus at the center. These were temples. This was where you went to pray, to offer your incense and your sacrifices to the gods. And by having an open dome, you had a direct conduit to the heavens. Besides the fact that domes are heavy and hard to build, so if you leave a hole in the center, that's less weight. It's engineering meets religion. Now, in America, we don't do this so much with our churches or our temples, in part because, frankly, very few organized religions have that much money in America. We don't have a state church, so we don't have the funds to build something like St. Paul's Cathedral in London or Church of Christ the Savior in Moscow. Instead, we build these little mini temples as our capitals. And when we put domes in them, we still think architecturally about the sky. So we have those stars up above us. Today, we interpret those stars as representing the future of Michigan. The idea that they sort of serve as a source of inspiration for us as we try to chart a path forward for the state. But for the people who put them in, they may have simply seen them as part of an age-old artistic tradition, as were the 8 women who placed under the stars a couple levels. At various times, people have referred to these ladies as allegories or muses. They are symbols. These women follow, again, the traditional classical ideal of using a woman to represent something important. I was told once by my predecessor that this is really a compliment to us ladies because the Greeks believed that the female form was the most perfect creation in nature. So by using women as these ideals, we are, again, inspiring. Now, these women represent things like education and art and the sciences. Interestingly enough, we did not know who painted them for over 100 years. The man who did the work, whose picture you'll see here, was Tommaso Uglaris. He was an Italian artist who was living and working in Boston in the 1880s. And he got the contract in partnership with the Wright company. We don't believe he ever set foot in Michigan. We believe he probably painted these in his studio in Boston, sent them to us by rail. And then we know that when Wright's men were up on the scaffolding, they were the ones actually responsible for gluing these and mounting these into the dome. What's interesting is his name is never mentioned in local Lansing papers, which might have to do with the fact that in the 1880s, we were struggling, to put it politely, with the issue of immigration, both at a state and at a federal level. Congress had passed laws limiting work on public buildings to American citizens. So Michigan, likewise, discussed something similar. And in 1887, when it comes time to appropriate the second round of money to do offices and work in the corridors and so on, there is a back and forth between members of the Senate about whether or not there should be conditions put on this funding. And that condition is, should the contractor have to be an American or in the process of becoming an American citizen? Now, there's also other kinds of politics in here. William Wright did not have union employees. And one of the senators who wanted to put conditions on this wanted him to hire union men. And it is said at one point in time that he actually offered Wright a bigger appropriation if he would agree to use union painters. Wright did not. So they ended up putting language in the second appropriation that said, you have to be an American to work on this project, to get this contract. And many people saw this as an attempt to push Wright out. Now, not coincidentally, the senator who is leading this drive is also an interior decorator from Detroit, who was one of Wright's rivals. What he may not have known, but certainly came to realize quickly, was that William Wright was an American citizen. He had been an American citizen for years at this point in time. He had immigrated in the 1850s. In 1858, he had signed what was then called his Declaration of Intent, meaning he started the citizenship process, and 10 years later, he finished it. So in 1868, he fully renounced his loyalty to Queen Victoria, as it would have been, and he became an American. But that was not enough to stop this whole issue bubbling up into politics. Now, ultimately, Wright's company was the only firm that bid for this 1887 job. Everyone pretty much knew by that point in time we were happy with their work. And so it ended up becoming a non-issue. But it's a reminder that politics creeps into everything, even who gets to paint the walls of the Capitol building. And here we can see some more of those walls as part of this phase of the project. They were doing work in the corridors. So if you remember your trip to the building, you know we have beautiful tall ceilings over 20 feet tall, and every last inch of those ceilings and the walls is all painted. It would have been quite the project, quite the process to see. And we know not everyone thought it was a lot of fun to live through. The third appropriation was passed without condition, by the way. They completely dropped the language about citizenship in 1889. And they also saved some of the hardest things to paint until last, including the state library. So here you can see a little figure cropped from a picture of the state librarian looking a little stressed about the fact that the decorative artists are going to come and build scaffolding and put drop claws all over her domain. And she is going to have to work amongst them for probably several weeks. So it's again a reminder that this project was full of human beings. And I have often thought, what did that sound like? Not only the clank of the scaffolding as that's being erected, but how many languages were being spoken? You know, we don't know everybody who worked for Wright. We do know the names of the unfortunate people who fell off scaffolding and injured themselves because they, again, ended up in the local newspaper. So based on that sampling of at least the klutzy painters, we know that there were multiple Germans, there were multiple Frenchmen, people from different parts of the old world. And to this day, many of them continue to remain anonymous, at least from our perspective. Although who knows, maybe that will change with another incoming donation. I'm going to pass things off to Jacob next, and he's going to talk more about the Wright Company overall. So help you put this one capital project into the broader context of their work throughout the Great Lakes region.
Thank you. So this end of the exhibit that is currently on display at the Capitol does talk about the Wright Company's other commissions. So the Capitol was not their only job they ever did. Naturally, they're on a long time. So part of this project was figuring out what else they decorated. Surely there's other important things that are out there that they decorated. I'll preface this by saying that almost nothing survives. We are the largest by far of their jobs to survive. But let's dig into what we know about their work. So we'll break it down into a few categories. We have boats, which is a surprise to us, decorating boats. We have commercial jobs, think businesses, offices, that kind of thing. Churches, places of worship, clubs. These are like Masonic clubs, country club, along those lines. Government jobs. There's one other notable government job besides the Capitol. We have helping and healing. These are things like charities and hospitals, private homes, residences, hotels, theaters, and special events. So these are big ephemeral balls, public installations like this street arch that was done in Detroit in the 1890s. So these are our categories. I'm going to walk you through first how we discovered all of these other jobs, and then an example or two from each of these categories of things that we found. So first, how did we sort these out? Well, where did we discover the history behind something like this drawing you're seeing on screen? So part of it was from the collection that we have. So throughout the drawings, some of them are labeled. This one is labeled. I'm going to zoom in on the label for you so you can read it a little better. But it says it's the billiard room of the residence of Hamilton Carhart Esquire. You probably recognize that name. Hamilton Carhart is the founder of the workwear company that we still know, based in Detroit. We don't know much about this. This is in the collection that we have at the Capitol building, but which home is it referring to? Carhart was a wealthy man. He had multiple homes. We don't know if this ever came to fruition, but what we do know is that Christian Weidman, in his capacity with the William Wright Company, at least designed the decoration for Carhart's billiard room in one of his homes. So that's the extent of what we know about that, for example. There are others that I'll talk about, one notable one later on that are a little more specific, and we were able to sort of validate, verify that the others existed. The other way we went about discovering these things is through newspaper research. Newspapers are a fantastic resource for researching historical tidbits like this. So twofold in newspapers. One way we went about this was through advertising. Anytime a major new building opened, Detroit was sort of the epicenter for them, but they worked all across Michigan and the Great Lakes region. Something like the Book Cadillac Hotel, which opened in the 1920s in Detroit. There was a full series, like a full issue of the Detroit Free Press, which vividly described the whole building, and there were advertisements throughout it, which were placed by all of the contractors that had a hand in every piece of the construction. That came down to the plumbers and the masons and the decorative artists. So the William Wright Company placed their ad in the paper saying, we are responsible for all the decoration at the Book Cadillac Hotel. So that is one way we go about this. That's a quick and easy search when we have these digitized newspapers at our fingertips. The other way is a little more tedious, but we have these columns where there's just one sentence here and there about different pieces, for example. And at the very bottom of this clipping, which is a Grand Rapids, it's a Detroit paper, but it's referring to Grand Rapids. It says that the William Wright Company decorators of the city, Detroit, are making the Grand Rapids club rooms as beautiful as an Oscar Wilde dream. So that tells us something. It tells us that they're working in Grand Rapids. The thing is that there is not something simply called the Grand Rapids Club. So what is it talking about? That took a little research, but it turns out they're referring to the Peninsular Club. And they decorated when they were building their new building in the 1880s. They're decorating that new iteration of their building in Grand Rapids. So it's examples like that where we have something to start with, and we can dig a little deeper into the history of these different institutions and things across Michigan and figure out what they're talking about. So let's go into some of those categories we talked about. We'll start with boats. Again, the big surprise for us that the Wright Company is doing boats. Two examples from that list are the Galatea or the Galatea, however we want to pronounce that. I'll take feedback if anybody has thoughts. It was a private yacht built for E.L. Ford of Detroit, and it was decorated by the Wright Company. They sent their decorators to Delaware to the shipyard to decorate it while it's dry docked. They launch it. Mr. Ford takes it on an inaugural cruise up and down the Atlantic coast and doesn't keep it for all that long. He ends up selling it to the Navy, who uses it during World War I. They get rid of it. And in 1924, sort of the trail goes cold, dries up. We don't know what happens to the boat after that. But that's one example. A more public example that you might be more familiar with is the SS Columbia, which was a boblow boat. The Columbia was built in 1902 for the Detroit Belle Isle and Windsor Ferry Company, and it was one of the steamers that transported visitors to and from Boblo Island for almost 90 years. And they retired that boat in 1991, and it still exists, sort of sitting awaiting potential restoration. It's in New York now. But they would have done some of the woodwork on that boat and different decorations like that on the interior of the Columbia. So those are our boats that we're going to talk about. In the commerce category, we have this beautiful building that I discovered in doing this research. This is the Detroit Chamber of Commerce building, which was constructed in 1879. And within the Chamber of Commerce building was the Detroit Board of Trade. And the Board of Trade had another one of these Detroit Free Press listings where they're giving vivid descriptions of all the rooms, all the decoration. And I want to read you a quote, which is on the screen here as well, which says that the upholstery is of red velvet, and above the head of the president upon a golden panel is the coat of arms of Michigan, and above the president's chair is a painting in which 3 female figures represent commerce, industry, and agriculture, the surroundings being allegorical. So those of you who visited the Capitol might think that that sounds familiar. It did to me also. We don't have any photos of the Board of Trade rooms or of the interior of the Chamber of Commerce building, but we can walk upstairs in the Capitol and find this over the Speaker's chair in the House of Representatives, which is probably quite similar to what they had on the Board of Trade. And those allegorical figures sound just like Tommaso Uglaris's muses up in our dome in the Capitol. So this is a good reminder that the Wright Company is not reinventing the wheel over and over again. Not every decoration they're putting on a wall is a fresh, brand new design. They are probably using things over and over again. So after they did our or after they did the Board of Trade, for example, they might have said, hey, we've done this beautiful coat of arms once before. Let's use it again in the Capitol. They could have done it time and time again with not only something like that, but lots of other designs like faux wood graining, like marbling, and lots of these different motifs that we have in the Capitol as well. Churches is the next category I want to talk about. And there's a couple here. The first one is the Howell Baptist Church. Howell is a town just a little east of Lansing. And their church that you're seeing here was built in 1873. It's the second building that they had. And the interior of the Howell Baptist Church was decorated by the Wright Company in 1887. We know this from a newspaper clipping. There's the building, by the way. We know this from a newspaper clipping, which says that the walls of the church were being cleaned in preparation for oil frescoes to be done by, quote, the same firm who recently frescoed the state capitol and in the same preparation. So this tells us that not only is it the Wright Company, but it's probably, by this reference, some of the same men who were in Lansing doing that work on the Capitol. And in looking at these interior photos of the Howell Baptist Church, that back wall design looked awful familiar to me. We have some of these acanthus leaves designs throughout the Capitol. We don't know the color. We don't know whether this is a textured design on that back wall like we have, but it's very similar anyway to what we have at the Capitol. Now, the other church I want to talk about is the First Congregational Church of Wyandotte. This is a building that was recently, within the last year or two, added to the National Register of Historic Places. And that is thanks in part to the Wright Company's connection. So the connection to the Wright Company and that the Capitol still survives as an example of them and as a National Historic Landmark itself. So as the State Historic Preservation Office is working with this church to try to draw some of these connections to work on this application for national recognition, they come and they look through this Weidman collection here at the Capitol. They're trying to find motifs, connections between the drawings that survive, things that are on the walls within the Capitol, and this building that still survives, because they already knew, based on, again, newspaper coverage, that the Wright Company did the work at the church. So they're using that knowledge, coming in and saying, well, this is the one big surviving example. Can we draw connections? They're able to draw connections from the church, their surviving artwork, and drawings within our collection. And that helps them with their application to become a National Historic Site. Clubs is our next category. So this is one of my favorite photos that was turned up in this research. This is from the Detroit Commandery Knights Templar Asylum, which was located on the upper floors of the Wayne County Savings Bank beginning in the 1870s. This was a bank that was located on Congress Street in Detroit. And the Wright Company was contracted to decorate the Masonic rooms, including the Grand Chamber, which you're seeing here, in elaborate red drapery, ornate decorative arts on the walls, including extensive gilding. Now, of course, this is just a black and white photo, but I feel like I can almost see the gilding on the walls, even though it's just a two-dimensional black and white image. But this work that you're seeing here was done by the Wright Company. Now, I'll mention that this is one example of many in which the Wright Company is decorating the same building over and over again. They did this work in the 1870s. They would, again, in 1905, redecorate the same building after they remodel it, when it becomes the Wayne County and Home Savings Bank. And then the building later on receives even upper floors. It's sort of just a mash of different buildings all piled on top of each other before it is demolished in 1932. It's a parking lot behind the Ford building in downtown Detroit. If you're familiar, you can visit the site of it if you want to. The next category is hotels. One of the big hotels that we want to talk about is the Winona Hotel in Bay City. This was a famous hotel, unfortunately burned in the 1970s. But we knew about this one from Weidman family lore, from their family history. They knew that at one point that both Christian and his son Oscar had spent time in Bay City working on this job. We have a postcard in our collection from Bay City that talks about them having been there and spent time working there. So there's some both family memory and artifacts substantiating these claims. But we're able to further substantiate it with one of those advertisements that I talked about, in which the Wright Company is claiming to have worked and laying their claim to all these different buildings that they did, including the Winona Hotel in Bay City and the Morton House in Grand Rapids. So this should have been an early version of the Morton House that they worked on. So see some of those interior views that they did of the Winona. Other than the Capitol building, the other government job that the Wright Company worked on was the former Detroit Federal Building. And the Federal Building stood at the corner of, oh, I got to remind myself, Fort and Shelby Streets in downtown Detroit. It was built in the 1890s. And this is one that we learned about in a different way. This was listed in a government report, a federal government report. You'll see the clipping for it up there. And it tells us that the job was to last 5 months in 1898, include decorative painting of the post office and courthouse, which were two of the main purposes of this federal building. Now, this was also the building that was originally the home to the famous $1 million courtroom that survives in Detroit, which was dismantled from this building and moved to the new Theodore Levin courthouse in the 1930s. What we don't know is what role, if any, the Wright Company had in the $1 million courtroom. It is made with multiple different kinds of marble, and the marble work did not come from the Wright Company, but it didn't have a marble ceiling. So there's theory that potentially the Wright Company had done a ceiling to match the rest of the room, something that probably would not have survived and been transferred over to the new building. So that's the other government job. I'll talk about a couple theaters. One of them was on the very site of that federal building, and that was the Whitney Opera House, which is on the left here. Stood on the same site, and it was demolished to build the federal building. So this Whitney Opera House was built in 1875, and it was decorated floor to ceiling by the Wright Company, including more allegorical women that represented the arts, so poetry, music, drama, tragedy, and comedy. And it was demolished again in the 1890s. And this is another reminder that not only is the Wright Company decorating the same building over and over again, but decorating different buildings on the same site. They last long enough to have their work up and down all of these streets in Detroit and across Michigan and the Midwest. The other theater you're seeing here on the screen is the Grand Opera House, which was a fascinating test in my research skills to figure this out, because this changed hands numerous times, changed names numerous times. We were able to substantiate that the Wright Company decorated this building several times throughout its history. It opened in 1886, closed in 1928. The 1886 decoration was described as Moorish with blues and golds. And we don't really know ultimately after it closes what happens to the building, but there's a parking garage on this site now in Detroit. So something else that we don't have anymore. One really fun thing that we wanted to do, or I guess one of our goals that we wanted to do throughout this project, is somehow tie the Wright Company to the Detroit Institute of Arts. Could we do that? Well, we were able to do that through the Detroit Art Loan Exhibition. The Detroit Art Loan Exhibition took place in 1883. It had assembled a special temporary exhibit building, which was filled with the wealthy Detroit population's private art collections, the collections and work of local artists and different collectors. So they put all their works on display, and it sparked an interest in art in Detroit, which led to the Detroit Museum of Art, which led to the Detroit Institute of Art. So this was sort of an ancestral exhibit that was put up in the 1880s before the DIA existed. The image you're seeing on screen is of one room that the Wright Company had hand in. This room housed the collection of James McMillan, who would go on to be a U.S. Senator from Michigan, and it displayed his collection, and then the Wright Company decorated the room around his collection and enhanced it with a few other decorative elements. They also loaned 2 paintings to go on display at this exhibit. They were from the collection of Lewis Cass, which is one of our territorial governors. So this is hinting at something that I think we're going to talk about in a minute as well, and that's that the Wright Company sort of evolved into a gallery of sorts, so sourcing works of art from the old world to bring over here to the Americas to sell to Detroit's elite and their wealthy to decorate their homes with. So they're going from decorating the walls to also supplying furnishings and artwork and furniture and things like that. Now, because we're from Lansing, I can't not talk about some important Lansing things. The key one that I want to talk about is the Barnes Castle. This was an incredible home that was built contemporaneously with the Capitol in the 1870s. There have been rumors about this home for a long time that Mr. Barnes, who was Mr. Lansing, a railroad magnate, he was a state representative, he was the mayor, he did everything. He built this home on the banks of the Grand River in downtown Lansing in the 1870s. Folks for years have said, he paid the workers more to come from the Capitol site and build his house. We've never substantiated that, but there had also been rumors that he used the same team that decorated the interior of the Capitol to decorate his home. We have substantiated that. So Mr. Barnes' home is built in the 1870s. And he, around this time, is hiring the William Wright Company to decorate the interior of his home. How did we figure this out? The drawing on the screen comes from the collection that we have, the Weidman collection. It's done by Christian Weidman. It has the stamp in the far bottom right corner that says the William Wright Company. So this is work that Christian did for the Wright Company. And somewhere in here is the clue that sort of gave it away for us. If you look extra close, I guess I can mention the laser pointer, but if you look in the little orange rectangle almost up there, on the top and the bottom of those halls on the left, you're going to see a little cipher that says OMB. And when we're thinking about Lansing and people that could be none other than Orlando Mac Barnes. Those are his initials that he put on everything. So Orlando Mac Barnes' hallway must have looked like this. I wasn't satisfied with that. I wanted to try to further substantiate that. So in the 1940s, the state was offered this home for a potential governor's residence. They turned it down, spoiler alert, so it didn't survive. But they did take interior photographs, and those survive. So we were able to take a look at what the entry hall looked like when the building was abandoned, which it was starting in the 1920s. If you look extra close at these, there's the end of the hallway, there's the fireplace, and at the top of the ceiling, there's this almost fan design, which is also in the drawing. And there's almost this triangular repeating pattern down the sides, which is in both the photo and the drawing. So that helped me confirm and ease my mind that yes, we weren't jumping to conclusions that this was indeed the drawing of the Orlando Mac Barnes mansion front hall. So we were able to confirm that the Wright Company did that work in Lansing. One more. And this was the last discovery that I made when I was still actively doing this research. This is the Dresser home, the Dresser mansion in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Really the big job that we talk about that's outside of Michigan, although there were a few major jobs outside of Michigan. Solomon Dresser was a congressman from Pennsylvania, but he was born in Michigan. He was also an oil baron in Pennsylvania, so he was a wealthy guy as well. He attended the New York Pan American Exposition in 1901, where Louis Camper, a Detroit architect, had designed the Michigan building. He loved that building, so he commissioned Camper to design a home for him in Pennsylvania. This is the home that is the result of that. And he was so proud of that home that he put a book together documenting the entire interior. He listed all of the contractors who worked on that home, and that helped us break this case loose because Mr. Dresser included interior photographs of things like his French ballroom on the top of the home. And the French ballroom was described as being frescoed in one delicate blue cloud with faint suggestions of cherubs and garland of roses, producing an almost atmospheric effect. Now, in the book, it tells us that the decorating and the furnishing was done by the Wright Company. Okay, I'm satisfied with that. But this room looked very familiar to me because the Weidman collection that we have is not just drawings. There are family photographs as well. And one of those family photographs we have is this one, taken in the ballroom, which is very exciting. And Christian Weidman is the man standing right at the center with his arms sort of down by his side right there. So this was his job. He was the foreman of those, or his workmen. So he would have been the man leading that job. And we knew that he had done work in Pennsylvania. His son Oscar had done work in Pennsylvania. So this is one of those big jobs that we think we've substantiated. So I am going to give things back over to Valerie, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the Weidman family and their family history.
So one of the things we wanted to make sure of when we took this collection in was that we were not just thinking about this as an art collection. We wanted to make sure we knew a lot about the family so we could contextualize it and we could tell Christian Weidman's story, which is in some ways the embodiment of the American dream. Christian came to America with his brother. Come on, one more click. He came to America just at the end of the American Civil War in the 1860s. So he was born and raised into a German Lutheran family in northern Germany and forgive me, I do not speak German, Neustadt in Schleswig-Holstein or something like that. Basically, this is at the very northern edge of what is today Germany, right along the Baltic coast. His family did pretty well for themselves. He was the son of a laborer, but that laborer was successful enough that his three sons went into the trades. So this was a step up. One son learned printing. That was Heinrich, who also was the poet. Christian learned interior decoration. And the third son learned cigar making. And the third son actually was the local boy who stayed in town with the family for a while. Heinrich and Christian took to the road. And they are traveling throughout what were then a series of German states. This is before Germany is actually unified in the 1870s. And as they are traveling around, they are meeting different people. They are seeing different governments. Christian will end up in what is today Austria at one point in time. Some of the earlier drawings in the collection are marked as being from Austria, where he was doing some work in Vienna. But at the same time, this is not just a cultural tour or experience. This is a part of the world that is rife with political unrest. And according to family tradition, the reason Christian and Heinrich left when they did was because one or both of them was about to be conscripted. This was at a time when Prussia is gaining power. And frankly, they did not want to fight in the Prussian army. So they decided to set sail for America. And when Christian made this decision, Heinrich told him, "I'm coming with you. We two shall go together." And this is part of the lore of the family, but this is also part of what was written down by Heinrich. So they will immigrate to Detroit. They come to Detroit because they have a sister who's already here. They have a sister named Maria who presumably immigrated with her German husband. And you have to remember, this is at a time when Germans constitute the largest immigrant group in Detroit. So there would have been German-speaking churches, there would have been German clubs, there were German singing associations and gymnastics societies. There were Germans everywhere in Detroit at the time. So in some ways, they still would have had one foot in a familiar culture. But it's interesting to think about Christian. Did he know any English before he came? Was he learning English on the ground in Detroit? How many languages did he speak? How many languages were being spoken on these job sites with men of different origin? Now, we know that they made their home in Detroit. Both men would remain in the city for the rest of their lives, or at least when Christian wasn't on the road traveling, his home base was Detroit. And we can see actually on the screen a couple pictures of the family homes where he would live. The second home at the bottom, which was built in the early 20th century, was in my mind, this was, again, the embodiment of that American dream. By this point in time, he is the immigrant who has done very well for himself. He is married, he has had a family, and he is able to build his own house. And this house, which of course the Wright company did the interiors for, this house does survive. This house is on Erskine Street in Detroit. It is now owned by an alumni group from a fraternity. And there are family members, Riedman descendants, who have actually been able to visit the house and see it, which was a very special moment for them. Christian did marry another German immigrant. Interestingly, she was of a Prussian family, Maria Wolf. So her family had immigrated when she was a young woman. They would have a family together in Detroit. Ultimately, they would have 8 children, 7 of whom lived to adulthood, which was pretty good statistically in this era. Their first son, Henry or Heinrich, you do see both German and English forms in various documents and sources. Passed away young, which meant that Oscar became the oldest surviving son. And it was Oscar who really followed in his father's footsteps. Oscar had some of that artistic talent, and his family worked to foster it. I will say, though, This family produced an unusual number of professionals for this era. Actually, several of the Weidman daughters would grow up to have careers of their own. Multiple would become teachers. One would actually become a principal of one of the schools in the Detroit public school system. So this is a family of hard workers who are rising up within their professions. Oscar will ultimately train both as an artist and a decorative artist. And it is his daughter, his only child, Elma, who will eventually inherit both her grandfather's drawings, including many of the pieces that you saw here today, along with many, many more. There are over 200 works of art in this collection. She would also become the keeper of family history, and she would steward that for decades. She was raised by the broader Weidman family. Her parents died when she was a teenager, and so it was her aunts who helped bring her up. And through time, she became the keeper of these works of art and made sure that they survived then to go to her daughter and to other family members. And now Shayla is going to tell you more about the different types of art represented in the collection and what we know about Oscar's work and training.
All right. So as we've mentioned already, the Capitol is one of the best examples of the Wright Company's work that still survives today. We have 9 acres of decorative artwork in our building, and that artwork is a really good example of the techniques and the motifs that the company would have used really across everything that they were doing. So one example of that is here with the governor's parlor ceiling. So if you look at this, you can start to see some commonalities with other designs and just with decorative artwork in general. So you'll see we've got these brown bands, a lot of repeated motifs, right? So repeated brown bands, repeated acanthus leaf kind of swirling designs, repeated blue circles. Everything is very even and balanced. So if you imagine taking just 1/4 of the design, so say like one corner of it, you could then theoretically flip and repeat that design 3 more times to have an entire ceiling design. So what you'll see later and what a lot of artists would do is when they sketched out a design, they would just sketch one corner or 1/4 of it with the idea that then they know what's going to come to make the full ceiling design. They can just repeat that. You will also see in the center here the gold leaf. So this is an ornamental addition, very delicate. It's real gold that's put on there, but just very thin pieces. And you'll see that kind of throughout the Capitol. And I think Jacob mentioned in some of the other commissions that they did as well. So you see a lot of commonalities with all of these designs, and in order to have that happen, you have to have the artwork be standardized. So there's really 2 main ways that that comes about. One will be stencils, and one will be the use of repeated motifs that are often borrowed from elsewhere. So the stencils are the first thing we'll talk about. They're a way to increase efficiency. If you look here on the left, you're going to see a stencil from our collection. This is used, you can tell because you can see the red paint on there. This is really just a traditional stencil, so it would be used the way you'd imagine a stencil would be used. But we do also have another stencil, which is this long one across the bottom, and that is evidence of pouncing, which is another method of stenciling that you might be a little bit less familiar with. So this is a way to transfer a design from a paper onto a wall. The way that this would be done is first drawing a to-scale design called a cartoon, which is that long piece up there. This is coming from cartone, an Italian word that basically means a big piece of paper. So what you'll do is draw the design, and then you'll poke holes along the design. You can use an awl like we have up there. You can use a pen, a needle, anything sharp, essentially. Poke all these holes, and then you put the cartoon up against the wall. And you'll use a pouncing bag, which is generally a cheesecloth that's filled with a type of powder, so either charcoal powder or chalk powder. And you can hit that pouncing bag against the design. It'll transfer the design through the holes onto the wall. So when you peel that away, you'll have the design transferred up on the wall there, and then you can go over it and paint. And that's a pretty easy way to do large scale designs like that. Another way of standardizing these different designs in artwork is to borrow different ornamental designs from elsewhere. So what you'll see up here is a book. This is called The Grammar of Ornament, but there's a lot of different versions of these books. And artists will either study from these books or borrow design from these books, sometimes borrow design from elsewhere as well, like from other artists' work. That was kind of a fine thing to do at this time. It wasn't considered copying in a bad way. And we don't know if Christian Weidman would have used a specific book, but we figure he probably would have pulled from some type of book. We do know that John Canning, that did the Capitol's restoration in 1987, did use a book, and it was this specific one. So this book, The Grammar of Ornament, was published in 1856. So these are really pretty timeless. They can be used over and over again. Again, that's a way that things just stay standardized even over big amounts of time. So from this kind of standardization and reuse of designs comes the debate about artists versus artisans. So historically speaking, artists and artisans would fight with each other, and later on art historians would also get involved with the fight. But they would think of artists as people that create and invent new and original ideas, while artisans are people that are copying patterns, and it's a bit more mechanical. So artists would practice fine arts. This is drawing and painting, and today we would include sculpture. Back then, they didn't include sculpture. We'll get to that in a minute. But artisans would focus more on crafts and more labor-intensive things. And so back in the day, that would also include sculpture, because sculpture is a lot more labor-intensive than something like drawing or painting. So good thing to remember is that the lines can blur with this. So artisans can have the formal artistic training. Artists can take on more artisan commissions. And a lot of these boundaries are really created later on by art historians as well. But historically, some artists would have been really engaged with these types of debates. And I think they just liked fighting with each other, to be honest. A really good example is the Paragone, which happened in the Renaissance. So Paragone is Italian for comparison. This is a huge debate amongst artists where they debated the merits of painting versus sculpture. So at the time, like I said, sculptors were considered artisans, very physical, while painters were artists. They had these they were higher thinking, they didn't have to move as much when they did art. And so they argued back and forth about who can represent nature the best. So painters can use color and sculptors can't, but sculptors use three-dimensionality and painters don't. So there's always fights like this going on throughout art history. Bottom line is that the training is actually very similar regardless, and we'll talk about what that training would look like. So essentially it would fall into two categories: apprenticeships and formal schooling. Early on, it's really just apprenticeships that are available, and that's dating back into the Middle Ages. But later on, universities will start to offer decorative arts training. So the first art schools start to come about in the mid-16th century, and that's coming out of Italy. It's not until the 20th century that decorative arts specific degrees will come about. And specifically talking about the Weidman family, we don't have a record of formal training for Christian Weidman. Most likely he would have learned by doing, and he probably would have gone through the apprenticeship system. So traditionally, apprentices would begin at 12 or 14 years old. They would spend about 7 years apprenticing, and then they would become a journeyman. So that means they can travel and they can work. And later on, you can become a master tradesman, which means you can then hire journeymen and hire apprentices underneath you. For Oscar, you'll see up on the screen, we do have evidence that he attended art school. So he attended the Royal Art School in Berlin. That was founded in 1869. He would have been there from November of 1893 to November of 1894, so just the 1 year. And most likely he would have combined the university training with learning from his father, learning by doing. I think that's just kind of natural if your father's already an artist. In these pictures, you can see one of them, he's posing as an artist, and then one of them, he's with some of his colleagues from art school, most likely. Now, given the variety of art in our collection, I think it's kind of cool to approach a lot of the pieces from Oscar specifically as Oscar being a student in training. So some of the work he would have done while he was in art school, or, beforehand as well. So typically in art school, you're going to practice a little bit of everything. Our collection has a really big range of things. We've got anatomical studies. We have portraits in various mediums. We have sketches and landscapes and still lifes. On screen, you're going to see some of the graphite and charcoal sketches that we have. So these are done on sketchbook paper. Almost all of them have tears, so it's like they've just been torn out of a sketchbook. And some of them have pinholes in the corners. So I would argue that these are some of his better sketches that have the pinholes. And so I think these might have been done in classes and turned in as assignments. And if you're familiar with art school, there's artistic critiques that are done. So professors will have students pin their artwork up on the wall, and they just kind of live critique each other's art. So I think they might have been used, some of the pieces, in artistic critiques in school. I think these are generally a thing that people say are kind of intimidating. So I'm just imagining Oscar being in Germany and then having to do an artistic critique was probably very scary for him at first. Now the charcoal and graphite sketches up here, they're kind of organized based on subject. So you're going to see at the left, we have anatomical studies, rib cages, ears, eyes. We've got an arm up there as well. It is important that artists understand the anatomy of the body. So if you want to convincingly show what a body looks like outside, you need to understand like how it works and how it moves inside. So understand bones, understand muscles, in general, just understand anatomy. And then you're going to see object studies at the right as well. So this is really good to practice light and shading, drawing things from life in general. And for a decorative artist, this would be really useful because, I mean, you can see these are very similar to some of the designs we've seen already. We do also have some pieces that show him practicing different stages of development with his art. So up here, we've got 3 different cherub drawings. And you can see he starts out in graphite and then he sketches kind of a loose pen drawing and then he refines it. So he adds more detail. It's a bit more specific. You can see he's kind of working through that design and perfecting it to what he wants it to look like. We have a lot of portraits as well. So I have a couple up here. These are done in several different mediums. So aside from just learning about the different types of art, you also have to learn how to work in different types or different media, I should say. You can see the charcoal one up there, which is kind of a traditional media. We've already talked about that a little bit. We have a pastel. So at the bottom, the woman with the blue background. And that is going to be a little bit more delicate medium. So in my opinion, it's really good for portraying skin because it's very smooth. It can give you that kind of look of having like light or life in a person's face. The girl with the longer hair up there, that's done in watercolor. So watercolor will let you do more broad washes. It'll let you blend, and it just kind of operates a little bit differently than charcoal or pastel would. And then we do have some pieces in gouache as well. So gouache is it's like a thicker version of watercolor almost. So it's thick and opaque, but if you add water to it, it'll operate like a watercolor. So it's kind of in that in-between. Kind of a fun medium though. So you're going to see 2 cityscape and a landscape up there in gouache. And I did want to point out with gouache, there is kind of a like preservation concern there. Talking about taking care of our collection, gouache cracks really easily, so it's kind of prone to loss. So especially on the left, you're going to see there's cracks and you can see some areas where the paint is coming off. So it might not have been stored super well before we got it. Now it's our job to make sure that we don't lose any more paint than has already been lost. So that's kind of something else that we've been thinking about since getting this collection. Then the last part I wanted to talk about, which is probably pertaining the most to what we talked about today, is the different ceiling designs that we have in the collection. So I pulled some of my favorite ones here, but we've got a whole bunch of them by both Oscar and Christian, although we've got more by Christian. We did talk about the 1/4 sketch that could then be flipped and repeated to make an entire ceiling. So you'll see several examples of that up here. These are going to be in kind of graphite under drawings and then watercolor and gouache mixed together. So like if you think about that middle part of the kind of sky looking oval, that's going to be more watercolor. The really fine designs are going to be done in gouache a lot of the time. So these are just a sample of some of the things we have in the collection. And they've really given us a better idea of what would have gone into the process of decorating the Capitol. So even though these aren't all pulled directly from the Capitol ceilings, we can kind of use it to learn more about our own building and, the whole process that it took to decorate it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and he will tell you a little bit more about how to learn more about these things.
Thanks, Shayla. So I have the last very tiny bit of our program today, and my job as web coordinator is to let you know how you here in Holland, Michigan can experience this exhibit in its whole, because making the hour and 25-minute trip out here today, we recognize that Lansing is not in everybody's backyard. So with our exhibits at the Capitol, we strive to make them as accessible to everybody as possible. We feel that's part of our duty. So besides for just hearing the program or maybe come to the Capitol, experience it in person, we also have 3 other ways that you can experience the exhibit. So first of which is our special collections website that we established for this exhibit. The exhibit itself premiered at the end or at the start of last year. So it's been up for about 2 years now. As Valerie mentioned at the very beginning, it comes down next month, unfortunately, for a brand new exhibit that we're putting together. But we will keep this information available, both on our special exhibit website, which you can see as mscexhibits.org. On this website, you can not only see the full commission of Wright projects that Jacob talked about. You can learn all about the Weidman family on there as well. You can even go through and see the entire collection. There's about 250 art pieces in the collection, and you can see every single one, detailed pictures, dimensions. You can learn about it's oil painted on canvas, it's gouache on sketch paper. You can learn all about it. So you can go through and browse the collection yourself. You can also see videos of how we at the Capitol achieve some of this artwork. We have a lot of faux wood finishes throughout the Capitol. We have faux marbling in the Capitol. We have a lot of stencil work in the building. And you can see videos of artists actually going through the entire process of all these different techniques. So that's a really useful resource that you can see at home, our special collections website. Because the exhibit is coming down next month, in order to preserve the information moving forward, because the Wright Company did so much work around Michigan other than just the Capitol building. We're working on a full publication of all the exhibits materials so that we can keep it for future reference for outside researchers and our internal research as well. And then finally, if you've been to a historic site, a lot of historic sites and museums are now utilizing smartphone tours and audio tours where you can go through with your own phone and explore at your own pace. We developed a short little tour for this exhibit specifically. The exhibit is located on the ground floor of the Capitol, right outside the east elevator, our main elevator. And so the smartphone tour is designed to take you from the exhibit on the ground floor right up the elevator to the first floor, second floor, and third floor. So you can see some of Weidman's sketches on actual display on the walls and ceilings of the building. It's a really, really cool experience to do that. It's about a 15-minute tour, so nice and easy to do up the elevator and back down to the ground floor. These next few slides will take you through some of these examples that you'll see on your smartphone tour. So what you'll see on each of these is a photo from the Capitol, one of its surfaces, compared to sketchings found in the Weidman collection. So this first one you'll see, this is from the very top of the wall underneath the cornice of the Senate chamber. You have this repeating triangle motif, and you can see it right there in the sketch, right? Not exact, but very, very close. Again, he would have been working from a general template of designs that he could choose from. And then it was up to him and the artist working for him to put variation to it to match the setting that it was actually in. So here you can see ceiling of the House chamber. We have a beautiful coffered ceiling with 126 glass tiles. And around the edges of those glass tiles, you'll see this repeating motif up here too. One of our most common motifs throughout the building are acanthus leaves. Acanthus leaves you'll find on the top of Corinthian columns. You'll see them on our walls and ceilings. It was used a lot in classical design. The acanthus leaf has a sort of a medicinal symbolism to it. So it's a very healthy vine. So you'll see a couple different variations throughout the building on our ceilings, on our texture plaster walls in the first floor corridors. You'll see them as you ascend our 91 steps from the ground floor up to the third floor. So all over the building in different levels of detail. We also, like I mentioned, we have a lot of what we call faux finishes. So we have a lot of white pine that is painted to look like much more expensive walnut. We didn't have the money to buy the walnut, so we cheated a little bit during construction. We painted all of our cheap white pine to look like the walnut instead. We have faux marbling in the building. It's white pine or sometimes iron that's painted to look like Tennessee red marble, which is a 10-layer painting process, which you can also see a video of on the special exhibits website. And we have this faux motif. This is called vermiculated work. Kind of looks like little squiggles, to put it best, in some of our archways and ceilings. This is to replicate kind of rough stonework. And then finally, we have a really beautiful mosaic pattern that's found in our old state library space that was in the west wing of the building. So we have some faux mosaic. And then probably one of the more exact depictions from sketchwork to final finish on the walls is found in our Supreme Court chamber up on the third floor. We have this beautiful texture plaster frieze with alternating horizontal and vertical square segments. And we also have some really nice texture plaster wall designs as well, with a spirally vine pattern and then leaves sitting on top that we think is maybe a clematis leaf, which has a lot of symbolism in Victorian artwork too. And you can see sketches right from the Weidman artwork there, pretty exact. So I think with that, we've been going for quite a while here. So we'll wrap it up. So I just want to say thank you so much for attending our program today. Art Adorns the Path of Life. We hope you, if you haven't been to the Capitol, can make the trip and see the exhibit in person, or you can see it right from your couch at our websites. So thank you so much. I think we'll turn it over for questions.
Just a quick question. I'm going to be in Lansing tomorrow. Do I need an appointment to stop in, or can I just stop in?
You can just stop in. Yep, tomorrow is a Thursday. We're open Monday through Friday from 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock. We have self-guided tour options. I know we've passed out some of our booklets there. That's a really good way to take you from the ground floor up to the third floor. We also have our brand new Welcome Center that opened up in the summer of 2022. That's called Heritage Hall. It's underground behind the Capitol, and we have some more exhibits down there too you can take a look at. So self-guided tours Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 o'clock. This year, we're actually open the first Saturday of every month for guided tours from 10 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And then if you do come during the week, we do have guided tours as well. First one starts at 9, and they go pretty much every half hour until the last one leaves at 4 o'clock. All free. No need to sign up in advance. We do encourage you to call to make sure that we're open, and maybe you can see the schedule. We're in the thick of school season right now. So if you don't mind going with kids, probably about 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. If you want something a little quieter, plan on an afternoon tour time.
This is a more generic art restoration project for three-dimensional oil on canvas that's dried out over time. It's being cracked and the risk of falling off for the layers. How's that restored without making it look like it's shiny or some other thing with adding oil to it?
Yeah, I'll turn that over to art historian.
Yeah, so we have two artists on staff right now. We have a decorative artist, and then we have an artist that mainly does portraits now, but also did decorative art more in the past. And they're both really experts at making sure that everything matches at this point. So they have basically for every paint color and paint type in the building, they've figured out the perfect mix of what they need to use. And they've got, I just saw this recently. I didn't know they had it, but a full binder full of like different swatches for every type of paint. So they're able to perfectly mix every time that they restore something, the tiny amount of paint that they'll need or a big amount, and make it match perfectly. And it'll take several days sometimes for them to do that. But yeah, we've got two experts on staff for that.
Back to the beginning of the presentation. were you saying that when they first built the building, they had no plans to adorn or to decorate it until the public complained, or they had plans to do it eventually?
They had vague plans. It was kind of one of those, oh, we'll have to do that eventually, but there wasn't any concrete concept of what it was going to look like. Frankly, it was just, we need to wait until there's enough money and then we'll start to think about it.
And I got a kick out of the whole bit about they were distracted from their intellectual abilities as a governmental body.
Yes.
That's commentary, not a question. I'm sorry.
It is interesting because we all give tours to school groups, and it's interesting to see the kids react to the building because it's much fancier than anything they have generally seen up to that point in their lives. But it's also interesting to hear legislators talk about it. And I swear I'm not making this up. I've heard many legislators over the years who talk about the fact that they're just in awe of the building and that they feel like it sets a standard that they then have to live up to while they are there. Some of them will also talk about the fact that it provides this sense of continuity because it does not look like a modern building. It is not a modern building. You are forced to recognize life is bigger than what you are doing today. And I think that speaks to the inherent value of historic structures and historic artwork. That is something you can't ever put a price tag on, but it just sort of seeps into the consciousness of those of us who are in the building every day. And I like to think it elevates the work that's being done within it.
Another question I have is about these buildings that lasted such a short period of time, like the Barnes House in Lansing. It just seems like, why did they just keep taking them down and building something else?
That's a great question. We ask the same thing sometime. The Barnes Castle lasted from the 1870s, demolished in 1957. So it lasted a little longer, but it was abandoned for 30 years after the family sort of went broke. They just left it, and it was where kids romped around and, broke into the house and hung out there throughout the 30s and 40s. But we don't know. Things were a little more ephemeral, I guess. Like they faster moving. They need this land for a new federal building. Tear the Opera House down. Where these houses last a little longer. The Dresser home in Pennsylvania burned down in the 1980s. So fire is a cause for some of this, but there's always that question. I mean, it happens in Lansing, but it happens all over the place. Why are we tearing these old buildings down? They've been saying that for a long time. So that's part of it.
I would also say this is America. We're not good at old. we're writing a new book about the building actually, because it'll turn 150 in a few years. And I've just been reading a lot about the 1960s when actually we talked about tearing the Capitol building down as well. And some of it was just, we are all into modernity and efficiency and we're not Victorian. So why should we have a building that looks Victorian? Some of it was also the fact that not all American buildings were built to last. Arguably, our Capitol was. It's a masonry building. If you ask Elijah Myers, it's fireproof by 19th century standards. He was our architect. But what's interesting to me is even in the 60s and 70s, as the conversation starts to turn, you see multiple people who are still European born who are saying, what are you people doing? You're constantly tearing down everything every few decades. Why don't you learn to keep your buildings and preserve them? And, you think about the amount of money Americans spend every year to go to old countries and see old buildings. You would think eventually we would figure this out, but it's very much an ongoing issue in America, shall we say.
I moved to the Lansing area in the late 1960s, and my husband worked for the Attorney General's office. And that was back when the Capitol was divided into, they called it warrens, right? Like they had multiple floors on every floor. It was scary.
Yes, it was. So in the 60s, well, actually starting back in the 1930s, Brian's done a lot of research on this. We put in half floors. So because our ceilings are so tall, we built another floor halfway across. Those half floors did a lot of terrible things to the art and the plaster work, particularly because we also put subdivisions in. So we're punching holes in walls, we're punching holes in ceilings. There's a legislator I know who's now 90, who served in this period, and his parents were Italian immigrants. He'd grown up here in Michigan, but he told me that when he was having a really bad day, he would climb up on his desk and he would punch out he would pop out the removable ceiling tile above his desk, and he would look at what was left of the decorative art on the plasterwork. So, there were some people who always appreciated it, but they were not always the people running the building.
I have a question, and I should know my history better than this, but I'm thinking about Thomas Edison and the light bulb. And I'm thinking about when all the artwork was done in the Capitol building. Were there light bulbs so that they could paint, or what other source of light did they have?
Yeah, so we opened up on New Year's Day, 1879. Edison invents the light bulb, I believe, in the fall of 1879. So terrible, terrible timing for a lot of our technology, being right on the cusp of electricity opening up right before that cusp. So the building was gas lit for the first 20 years. From 1879 up until 1899. During that time, when the building opens, they had spent just a little bit of money for some really ingenious fixtures that were gas lit, but they were sparked using battery. These would have been wet cell batteries that were stored in a cabinet, and they had an electrician who would flick a switch on these cabinets, and it would send a spark through a wire right to the actual spigot of the gas, and it would spark it, and that would light it up. They only did it on a few chandeliers that were hard to reach, though, because it was so expensive and so hard to maintain. After that, through the 1880s, 1890s, they experiment with some really early forms, like they used carbon arc lamps, if you know what those are. It's pretty much open lighting that has two rods, and then you get a lightning bolt in between them. It's used a lot for street lighting during this time because it's so dangerous. But they actually hung these lamps from the ceiling of the chambers just to try it out. And they got light from it, but it was also, terribly loud and frightening. So they didn't use that in the end. The building's hooked up to a couple generators, DC current generators in the mid 1880s. The DC current is mainly used just for like small appliances and very small systems of light. So trying to light the entire building for it, there was a lot of complaints about how dimly lit the light bulbs were, to the point where in the house, they're like, you know what, let's just get rid of this. Let's go back to the gas lighting. Finally, in 1899, there's some AC generators that are installed downtown Lansing. AC generators, AC currents meant for this type of thing. So they spend entire 2 years going through to wire the entire building. Luckily, because it was gas lit, they already had all the iron piping through the ceiling. So they just ran wiring right through it, stuck light bulbs on our historic chandeliers, and suddenly we had electric light. By 1905, they had lighted the building so much, they were so proud of it, it was so successful, that they strung about 850 light bulbs down the outside of the dome itself. And for the next 50 years, you would drive by Lansing. Every night, you would see the entire exterior of the dome lit up. And in fact, it looks like a giant bird cage in the old picture, so we call it the bird cage. But yeah, in the 1950s, they switched to big spotlights on the dome, and we lose that. But yeah, buildings had a really long history of new forms of technology and having to adapt and compromise because we want to keep that historic aesthetic, but it's a working building. These people need the most modern technology. So, and you think of the gas light, the open flame lighting with smoke rising up to these beautiful surfaces too, just awful to think about. Good question. Anything else? Okay.
Well, thank you so much. Very interesting. Guess that's it. Thank you. That's great.